Welcome to the lectures of Future Studies. And today we continue with some of the investigations in image that might have an interest from the viewpoint of digital reality, how the imagospheric condition works. And as said before, the lectures have not been previously read. So the last lecture took probably much more time than I expected. And I would see myself continuing what we were doing last lecture. So maybe Plato and Plotinus, which are important from the viewpoint of how a poetic image can be seen, will be left for the next lecture. But today we go forward, remembering that in the last lecture we were talking about simulacra, different types of membranes, perspective or three-dimensional projection, and the counter-eye of perspective projection, giving a possibility for totally new type of abstraction from the viewpoint of human observer. We also slightly tried to look at the projections where three-dimensional image has been probably projected on curved surface, and then producing the hyperrealism and projection-based imagery of early and middle Renaissance, and also angular perspective distortions, and just a glimpse into the fluid perspective that is so common in the digital imaging. But before going forward, I would like to come back to Dresden Madonna by Johannes van Eyck, because I think it did not receive the importance and discussion that it allows us to look at the possibilities of projection and slightly foresee what will be coming within the digital reality. The Dresden Madonna, compared to the Arnolfini family, is not a solid object or an inanimate object. It is so-called triptych, where the wings of the Madonna can be turned out. But before we go there, let's have a look at slightly at the proportional system. We can clearly see that it is not an arbitrary decision where the lines of the proportions of the whole canvas are pointing. We can clearly see that the central part of the image brought forward by the diagonals of the squares is importantly occupied by Madonna and the Christ. It's also the case that some of the spatial elements really take their departure from these proportions. Whether it is premeditated, I think it is. If it was organized and drawn beforehand, we don't really know. And in the cases of these projections, I really do not want to go into the art historian or iconological and iconographic descriptions of it, but merely looking at the projections. As with Arnolfini family, we see that the vanishing points actually show us at least three horizons where the lines converge. They do have a difference. We can see that they are not symmetrical, which probably is a possibility for further investigation and research, but definitely they show similar layout of several horizons instead of one vanishing point and one horizon. But let's imagine how this mobile object, which probably was designed as a traveling altar, would work if we try to unfold it. We probably first see the Madonna coming out. Gradually the edges of the altar open up, showing us the colonnade on both sides of Madonna. and then finally the whole picture in a way opens up. Within that process, we also see as at the beginning, we see the Madonna as being the central figure and right in the viewing distance of when the altar is opened. Of course, we can only imagine this because the altar cannot be really touched. It's in the Dresden Museum, and the museum is quite jealous, even allowing the personal photographs of it not to be used. It asks for copyright, and clearly guards the copyright of it. So we can only imagine how it would work. So with opening of the wings, it is probably the case that the Madonna goes deeper into the image. And then when the wings are both open, they also exhibit their perspective vanishing as the main part of the canvas. And it becomes, in the unified system, when the wings are totally open, then the image like clicks into its position. I would see that there are two perspective distortions within that field of image. Firstly, the carpet and the baldacchino on top of the Madonna really cuts Madonna out of the ordinary interior. And as with the Berlin Madonna, it is the case that the proportions of the human figures and the architectural setting are totally different. But in the case of Dresden Madonna, it is not disturbing. On the contrary, I think this tapestry of baldacchino and the textiles under the foot of Madonna really cut her out of the interior and slightly in a curved space bring her again forward. The same happens if we look at the distribution of the distances between the columns. We would clearly see that at the distant part of the interior, the columns come together more in a closer distance than in the general distribution of the colonnade. So performing another type of optical illusion where the end part of the colonnade becomes curved. So we can also look at it as another curved space. So actually the central part of Madonna is through the projection brought forward by these two curved surfaces of the picture itself. At least this is my proposal and interpretation of Madonna. So these three-dimensional devices really bring it forward. But if we look at the back of the altar, we see that there are additional paintings to it that we were not discussing last lecture. So it means when it was folded together for the traveling purposes, it actually looked like that. So on the back side of the altar, Jan van Eyck has described two statues within a box. And if we now put together the depth of the frames, it actually looks like it is an empty box with these statues. It is possible to allow yourself in the center of the picture so that these images come on top of each other on the left and on the right hand side, allowing your eyes go out of the ordinary focus. Then you will see that it becomes a spatial. It really becomes a spatial image because on both sides the space vanishes into the perspective frame. But the eyes cannot see it fully three-dimensionally in that case because one of the images takes over. But nevertheless, the image becomes animated, it becomes spatial, and it becomes animated as it changes the upper part of the body. If you are able to try it, please do it on internet images because it is easier than on a certain distance of viewing distance, you can actually do it. The same actually happens with the Ghent altarpiece, where Johannes also, this is the closed altar. It's mostly it's open, so you have to wait to get it closed. But here, similar effect takes place when you allow two of the central images using different vanishing points to come together, and the statue becomes animated, like flicking in front of your eyes. So the projection types of Renaissance and painting really produce us with a lot of information about how projection was used and how we can imagine it could be used. But now we have so far mostly been talking about the projectional mathematics of the image that very usually is not really discussed because we take it for granted. So it's the normal part of the image that is performed or which we look at. Now I would like to go into some of the meaning systems that can be embedded and probably have some consequences when we export this knowledge into the digital reality. So this is 30 years old cave painting, and it is considered by Wikipedia to be a hyena, which one can really, even on this image, contest. It could be a bear, could be a jaguar, which is not European, of course, but nevertheless similar animal. And we might ask, how is this image depicted and what is depicted? But first of all, how is it depicted? If we want to be entirely clear in this phenomenological analysis, we would say that this is the light that is projected from that projector up there onto the white screen, having these pixels that will form that image, and it certainly comes from my computer, where it is another image. So we can describe the projection rather clearly, but it has nothing to do when we ask what is depicted. We probably can assume that this is some kind of color, ochre, soil, probably that has forced the lines on top of the surface of the image itself. Probably also interferes and makes some suggestions which we can't check because we can't get into that cave. Nevertheless, even this several times of copied projection of this image tells us that there is something there. So it has certain meaning. And now before we go forward with the images, I would like to show 6 speculations. And the further we move with our lectures, the more unfounded and more speculative these discussions will become. And here I would firstly say that the image in the current state of plenitude of visual information and visual projections launches an explosion of entangled meanings. When one and the same image is instantly shared around the world through the digital sphere, it gathers diverse meaning contexts attached to it by different viewers. Of course, it is not automatic that I will know all these meanings, but they latently become embedded in the image. And within the digital sphere, we can easily find out these different meanings because they manifest themselves within the digital reality. So with different experiential, cultural, and archetypal ways of understanding the image, it becomes embodied in its form simultaneously and becomes part of the presence, like a comet's tail attached to that particular image. So we can even imagine that this meaning tail or meaning field of each of these images in a way stretches all over the world through the digital networks. Secondly, most of the images do have their own value system, whether we like it or not. The value system of an image is embodied within the entangled meanings and usually created by the author or dependent on the author. Depending on the intensity or creativity of the image, the value system can overrun the explosion of diverse meanings and incorporate them into the premeditated or pre-designed value direction. So if we can imagine that the image has now these several layers of meanings, these meanings in a way within a cunning system of creativity all the energy of these meanings can be used then directing this image into a certain value direction. But this could also be contrary. At the same time, the image can have its own visual genesis of becoming that is unknown to the author, especially if the image is not really created by the author, but premeditated, copied. Some other images are used for creation of it. Then the visual genesis is something that might operate totally independently of author's will. This can also happen to the autonomous image production, like automatic or security cameras, as the entangled meanings are induced by the context. So the viewers really add the context to the automatic images that are made absolutely without any purpose. Although probably the machines have some purpose, but the images are like collateral outcome of this purpose. Nevertheless, in some cases, I think the genesis of or the meanings of the original or hidden form or meaning can then take over the explosion of meanings and even the value direction of the author if the author is clever and cunning enough to include this value direction into the image. We'll come back to some of these examples where I want to show how it happens. But as an introduction, a kind of dry list of how we can imagine from the viewpoint of empirical study what is happening to the images. Thirdly, the presence of image between past and future. Every image has a specific and universal space-time meaning attached to it. When being created, it has its fabrication and design history, in case of deliberate creation or even in a mechanical or automated timeline, as well as proposed or imagined future usage. So the images that are premeditated very often include already the purpose. They are made because of something. This past presence is parallel to the universal viewing presence of the image in general. So whenever we look at it, these two time frames, or even space-time frames, come together, thus bringing into the diverse meaning system particular past and imagined future of the created image as another hidden value system. And in case of Arnolfini family, we can see it deliberately, in a way, prolonged through the whole history of the painting, where we as viewers become part of this space-time continuum that Jan van Eyck was imagining and premeditating. Fourthly, the image becomes a small project of its own kind. And that is basically what we are going to talk about in the next lectures. Within the context of hybridization of material and digital, especially in the plenitude of information, as well as hybridization of informational, imaginable, and existential, an image becomes or has the directionality of being treated as a design project. So the information embedded in a simple image of photo camera actually can tell us much more things very soon than we know about it ourselves. On top of the time and space, of course, also the possibilities of the materials, where it has been produced, what it is produced of. As soon as we use multispectral cameras, or even very, very soon, I would imagine they will be specific scanning devices, which then embed within the image all the information. So the information there, in a way, can be used for altering, printing, or designing the image just out of that one-sided but nevertheless three-dimensional projection of certain object. The information attached to the object becoming an image of the information, or the information analyzed out of the image describing the object, transforms the viewing process into a simulation in digital reality, thus making the cognition horizon also possible design horizon, where we recognize the meaning of the image. The meaning of the image at the same time becomes a possibility for design. It becomes the possibility of design horizon. So the images become treated as projects of the future and memories of the future, just as the ordinary projects of design or architecture or planning disciplines are seen as the future manifestations of some ideas, and very often they even get realized. Fifthly, within the image is embedded a system of proportions and composition that we were just looking at, that usually elude the visual apprehension. This system can play an important part in making the images more intensive and creative, and thus enhance or mask the entangled meanings, including the main value system, premeditated entangled meanings or value directions, due to the underlying layer, which might have stronger connections to other phenomena. So it can go both ways. Sixthly, within the images of a spatial or seemingly spatial nature, a geometric or dimensional system or frame projection is embedded. And this I'm not going to talk more, because that was the whole discussion in the last lecture. So coming back to the question, what is depicted and how is it depicted?